This is a response to a video by Computing Forever called Rediscovering My Faith, My Journey Back to Christianity, in which he tries to sell us Christian nationalism. Now, normally I'd put a response video like this on my alternate channel, but the views expressed in his video are disturbingly common misconceptions, and I don't think they're getting enough pushback. The guy has hundreds of thousands of subscribers, including me, and I think his video is quite a negative influence, so he should get more criticism from channels of comparable size. Now, just because I'm subscribed to him, it does not mean I endorse anything he has to say. I disagree with him quite a bit, actually, but I'm subscribed to a lot of people with whom I disagree because I want to hear what people from all different walks of life and points of view have to say, to hear their various perspectives that may be different than mine and lead me to new insights I otherwise might not have had, even if I think they're still wrong. Because to change people's minds, you have to understand why they believe the things they do. I also think it's very important to stay out of an echo chamber, which can be very easy to fall into during this online age of pervasive algorithms. So, enough intro, let's get into it.
I've waited a long time to make this video, mainly because I have no idea how people are going to react to it. As you know, I cover a lot of dark and tough subjects on this channel. The fall of the Western world and the fate of humanity type stuff.
That's a bit self-aggrandizing. Know thyself, Dave. I've been subscribed to you for years. You mostly just complain about so-called social justice warriors. And like a dedicated ideologue, you've pinned all of the world's problems on a specific group of people you don't like. There's a lot of popular channels like yours wherein you participate in this sort of cottage industry of symbiotic outrage culture. What you're going to talk about in this video is something I've seen happen several times before, something I refer to as edgelording yourself into Squaresville. If it were just you, I would not talk about it, but it seems to me that you, along with many others, have cloistered yourselves in a filtered bubble of exaggerated threat from a certain nebulous group of people and fostered such an immense hatred for them that you've moved as far as you can in what you perceive to be the opposite direction. But what I find is that oftentimes the opposite poles resemble each other, which is why when I look at your channel, it's mostly you being constantly offended about things. Yes, I feel like I'd have to walk on eggshells around some of the people you complain about. But I also feel like I'd have to walk on eggshells around you. It's like what Nietzsche said about taking care to not become the thing that you fight against, and I don't think that you took care to do that.
And through it all, simply calling out how bad things are or how crazy they've become can get repetitive unless a solution can be offered.
And I can appreciate that, but the solution you're offering, which is Christianity, is not a solution, it's a reaction. When a society struggles, it turns to religion for hope. When a society is doing well, it tends to lose religion because they don't need hope. Religion thrives when society struggles, but when times are good, it's religion that struggles. This is why we see the first world turning so secular while the third world remains very religious. So I have good news and bad news for you. If you like religion so much, and if society really is in decline, then you'll get your religion whether you propose it as a solution or not. As prosperity dissipates, religion will rise naturally and organically. So you may see this as counterintuitive, but if you see religion on the rise, it's an indicator that things are actually getting worse, not the other way around.
Unless there's a pathway to suggest to people. We all need hope, and to believe in a better world. And I hope this video explains not only my own journey towards an emerging spirituality, as well as some reason for optimism, but also offers a clear explanation of how we can overcome the existential threats facing our nations. It seems now that a pattern is beginning to emerge among many of us who operate in this genre of red pill philosophy. When you take the metaphorical red pill, it's just the first epiphany, the first layer. You realize how much you've been lied to all your life. You discover that you've been fed an ideology perpetuated through biased narratives and spin. You begin to discern truth from illusion and reject the programming that they attempted to indoctrinate you with. Now, if the red pill is the means by which you discover that you've been lied to...
Okay, that sounds like so many of the atheists who describe deconverting from religion. Interesting how you've reversed it. One of the things religion does quite insidiously is that it plagiarizes, appropriates, takes credit for unrelated accomplishments. And in many cases, religious people are even the cause of the very problems they complain about the most. Remember that.
The black pill is how you learn just how dangerous those lies truly were.
Okay, they're not lies if people really believe it. You see, for instance, I do not think religious people are lying to me when they talk about the God they believe in. They believe it, so even if it is not true, it's not a lie, and therefore not necessarily malicious the way lying implies. Sorry about the notification. If I made any of you check your own notifications, that's just me.
The black pill is where you descend down the rabbit hole further and learn just how bad things have become. It's where the consequences of evil become truly apparent. It's also the point where you begin to experience a degree of hopelessness and despondence. This is the point of rock bottom.
Okay, said like somebody who truly has not experienced many problems in life. The frustrating thing about some conservatives, like you, Dave, is that you seem very unappreciative of the times you're living in. And I know there are people on the left who take certain things for granted too. But that's part of what I mean about the opposite poles beginning to resemble each other. This is the best time in human history to be alive, where each person has more freedom and ability to realize their true potential than at any other time in human history. And not only with the opportunity to thrive and advance, but to do so in relative comfort. Now, I don't have a problem with a conservative who wants to conserve the positive aspects of our society, but what I see all too often is conservatives like you who don't actually want to conserve what we have, but rather take us back to an idyllic time that never actually existed. Almost utopian, you might say. So in a way, you're actually a form of progressive because you seek to progress us to a place that's not only different from where we are, but different from where we've ever been, because you either don't know your history or didn't learn from it. It all fundamentally comes down to a base power struggle. And when you say the black pill is where you learn just how bad things have become, that's what I call priming you for a new religion. See, that's what religion does. It tries to sell you a cure to a problem so that you have to rely upon it. Now, if there is not a problem, then it has to convince you that there is one, either by just making it up or incorrectly correlating a cause, usually with the intent to obtain power by demonizing certain people, or by just outright causing the problem itself.
But luckily from there, the only way is up. Things can seem bleak, but it's virtually impossible to stay black-pilled for long. It's simply too difficult to entertain nihilism or despair for extended periods of time. Eventually, an appetite for hope, optimism, and meaning begins to develop. The soul requires nourishment. Enter the white pill, also known as the God pill. You begin to desire action, order, purpose, and a semblance of values in your life. The world may be going crazy, but you're not going to.
Look, things may seem bleak to those who are ignorant or unrealistic about our world's history or about the world outside of the largely secular Western world you value yet complain about so much. You say that this God pill comes to those who desire action, order, purpose, etc., which is a slander against non-believers, because it implies that we can't or don't already have these things. You're not making a distinction between inherent purpose and derived purpose. It's the difference between slavery and freedom. In your white pill scenario, the inherent purpose, that is to say the purpose God gave you, is to be a slave. If there's no creator being, however, then your purpose must be derived from yourself and can thus be whatever you want it to be, which is freedom. You're selling slavery, I'm selling freedom. But it's even worse than that, because the slavery you're selling doesn't come from an actual God. It comes from people who invented the particular God character you're espousing. And you're thus vulnerable to be manipulated by the adherents of the religion, by people claiming that it's fulfilling a purpose defined by God, rather than by those fallible human beings. Sure, religion sells you purpose and meaning, but it's still the purpose and meaning handed to you by other people, not God, and not yourself.
The very values that have been stripped from Western nations by the left for the last 50 years gradually begin to make sense.
Okay, what values are those? 50 years ago, it was 1969. Do you think our values were in a better place then? Being openly racist was far more socially acceptable back then. In your own country of Ireland, that was precisely when the Catholics and Protestants ramped up their conflict and started killing each other in terrorist attacks, riots, and murders. Those values, the U.S. was involved in a costly war with the loss of millions of lives, including 50,000 of our own troops, which is a number we would never accept today. That's off the charts in terms of troop casualties in modern warfare. Those values, there was the civil rights movement, wherein black people had to fight tooth and nail for basic equal rights under the law, and they had to endure immense violence and racism from the resistance of the typical values of that period, not to mention their struggles for basic social equality beyond the scope of the law. This is also right around the time the gay rights movement started, because gay people didn't even have basic respect and had to stay in the closet. Which of these values are you upset about being stripped from Western nations by the left? The further back you go, the more religious it was, and the more violent it was, and the less freedom there was. From blue laws to blasphemy laws to laws of obscenity, what you could do, what you could say, and who you could associate with and how was regularly restricted, both socially and by law, as religion had more power. What you actually value as Western civilization and the freedoms within were a result of our moving away from religious thought. Moving back in that direction would be a very bad sign, and if you truly value the freedoms of the Western world, then the last thing you should want is religion to regain the power it once had. If I could snap my fingers and send you back into medieval Europe where Christianity reigned for over 1,000 years, I would be happy to do so. But you know who would not be happy about that? You. So beware what you wish for.
I guess I considered myself an atheist since I was about 13. I rejected the religious teachings of my parents, who were both devout Catholics and quite conservative, and as I entered my teenage years, I began to become more liberal, and I believed that I could have all the answers, that science and secularism were adequate substitutes for religion and faith.
Okay, just as people can have bad reasons to believe in God, people can also have bad reasons to not believe in God. Even though I don't think God exists, at least certainly not the God of the Bible, there are fallacious reasons to reject that God, however, and I don't know how confident we should be that your 13-year-old self had very good reasons to disbelieve. Maybe you did, but if you did, I don't think you'd go back So I suspect that you didn't, but because we usually become wiser with age, not the other way around. You say you believed that you could have all the answers, but I'm not saying that all that much about you has changed. You're still here, claiming to have the answers, literally advocating the proposal of your answers. You seem to be misusing the term secularism. It's not so much an ideology, but a word to describe the absence of religious consideration, which is neither a replacement nor is it even atheistic. Your workplace could be totally secular, for instance, even if every employee there is religious. It just means that religion is not a deciding factor. On the other hand, if you know that, then what you are really advocating here is the authoritarian imposition of your religion.
But as I grew older, I also became more conservative, and I began to realize that the wisdom of my parents was based on something timeless, universal, and tried and tested for thousands of years.
Okay, and what did the vast majority of those thousands of years look like? Brutal wars, terrible pandemics, authoritarian oppression, lower life expectancy, high infant mortality, slavery, child labor, exploitation, and during all this time, Christianity was hegemonic and embedded in the culture far more than it is today. Yet will you give Christianity any of the credit for those things? No, of course not. You'll only give Christianity the credit for the couple hundred years at the tail end of its 2,000-year life, which is ironically the era during which we finally started to move away from Christianity, the era in which things finally dramatically improved. It's mind-numbingly frustrating that people think the way you do, that you look at the world and draw the exact opposite conclusions from the ones you should be drawing.
That the teachings of Christ were a set of rules and instructions that not only made intuitive sense when carefully studied, but actually had been essential in building and maintaining our Western civilization.
How? What took so long? The revival of classical antiquity, the Enlightenment, and the Industrial Revolution had a lot more to do with the rise of modern Western civilization than Christianity. But as usual, people want to give Christianity the credit because they take it on as part of their identity. So when Christianity gets the credit, so too do they.
While a decade ago I had buried myself in The Horseman, in my mid to late 20s watching Hitch, Harris, Dawkins and Dennett own religious apologists in debates time and time again, I had however dismissed all too quickly that the Horsemen were simply unable to adequately refute the claim that you cannot get an ought from an is. Science is the means by which we understand the physical world around us. It is not the means by which we derive our morality. For that, we need philosophy, metaphysics, religion.
Okay, well, science can help us understand how we do derive our morality. We look at how certain moral behaviors are rewarded through evolutionary advantages, how human survival depended upon our cooperation. More than that, though, we see how moral behaviors correlate with how altricial a species is versus how precocial it is. Seeing as how humans are the most altricial species on Earth, that is to say, our offspring need the most level of care before they're able to survive on their own, it's fairly easy to see how these scientific facts can explain how morality can arise through this necessary allotment of reliance upon other human beings during our most impressionable years. You don't need a supernatural universe creator who hates masturbation to explain it. While we're still young, because we need to be looked after by other human beings for a long time, we naturally come to realize the value of other human beings, even if they're not formally, explicitly taught any form of organized morality. It is subconsciously embedded. Another insidious thing Christianity tends to do is swoop in and take credit for these familial values that give rise to morality, despite the fact that these naturally forming family structures are orders of magnitude older than Christianity. It would be like a Muslim saying that since Muslims value food, you should give credit to Islam for the concept of eating.
Human beings need relatable stories, instructions, parables, in order to develop a moral and ethical framework in which to live. Science and religion are actually not in conflict, as some atheists believe. They're not actually in competition.
That depends on the individual believer. Now, I've been involved with this debate for a long time, and I've seen an awful lot of religious rejection of scientific facts. There's all kinds of creationists that reject science and work tirelessly to ban evolution from the classrooms, or to teach alternatives like creationisms, to teach the controversy, i.e. the conflict between scientific theory and of evolution and the religious theory of creationism, which isn't actually a theory but a hypothesis, one that fails under the slightest of tests. There's others that deny climate science for religious reasons. Some deny the Big Bang for religious reasons, that the universe is billions of years old, or they believe that the earth is only a few thousand years old. So, while some people don't let their religion conflict with science, don't make the mistake of thinking that you can be the spokesperson for all religious people. Sometimes people do pit their religion against science. And because politicians have a nasty habit of pandering to the religious or being religious fundamentalists themselves, these people can actually retard scientific progress.
One is the means by which we understand the physical world around us. The other is the means by which we derive meaning and moral instruction. This system may even form the basis of a legal system or constitution for a nation-state to live by, but the core philosophy must be based upon something that cannot be altered or replaced by man-made ideals. It's the idea that there is a higher power that man is answerable to, that governments and politicians cannot challenge, that the state is beholden to the values and morals that the populace subscribe to. This is one of the primary utilities of religion in our society.
The Irish Constitution, the preamble begins, "In the name of the most holy Trinity, in whom is all authority, and to whom, as our final end, all matters of men and of states must be referred." A very beautiful sentence. Now, Dave, you see, you can treat that as a kind of prayer, an invocation, if you want. And it has that appearance and feel. And I understand how non-religious people might kind of balk at that. And I always say this, when I was talking about it, I always say, look, I understand. I understand. But it's also something else. Apart from it, you can just back away from that fear you have, which is a natural kind of, maybe a resentment or a sense of, And I said, it's something else. It's a mechanism to do something. And what is it? It's a mechanism to take the most fundamental rights of human beings and place them out of the reach of human beings, so they can't be interfered with. And that's how you protect human beings from tyranny.
No. That is a profoundly dangerous sentiment. If a God does not exist, or even if a God does exist, but people have the wrong idea about who or what God is or wants, which you must believe even if as a theist who rejects other religions, who then is defining the fundamental rights of human beings? It's other human beings. Since that's the case, then putting those rights out of the reach of human beings is not just a way to protect human beings from tyranny, it's also a way to preserve and perpetuate tyranny. Because what if we decide that a husband has the right to beat his wife or have sex with his wife whenever he wants, regardless of what she wants, or has the right to own quote-unquote lesser human beings as slaves, etc. If we take these so-called rights, which people once historically considered to be their rights, and we place them out of the reach of human beings so they can't be interfered with, then you're preserving tyranny, not protecting us from it. You are advocating dogma. You want to abolish the ability to amend in light of better information. You want to stop our ability to improve ourselves. If you claim that it is God giving you the authority to impose these so-called rights, then you are using religion as a vehicle for tyranny.
Nations and even empires that lose religion tend to collapse within a couple of generations. This is the pattern that John Glubb observed time and time again when he catalogued the rise and fall of great powers throughout history.
Couple problems with that. Correlation is not causation. As I already explained, prosperity causes religion to decline and hardship causes religion to rise. That simple fact would create the exact phenomenon John Glubb observed through no fault of the irreligious, and then people could mistakenly draw the conclusion from such a pattern that societies collapse because they lose religion, which is demonstrably false. Societies lose religion because they prosper and don't require the hope of religion anymore. Now, if you see a successful society decline, as all societies eventually will, it will regain religion as a natural reaction to that decline because, for instance, people are no longer getting educations, so they get their answers from religion. And they're no longer getting medical treatment, so they turn to prayer. And mortality rates increase, so they turn to religion to cope with the deaths of loved ones. And they no longer have the means to socialize and entertain themselves in places like restaurants, movie theaters, and shopping centers, so they turn to church. So what you'd see is little religious influence in society, an eventual decline, and then major religious influence as a reaction, and then a gradual recovery. Since recovery occurs during the religious influence period, it's very easy for religion to just insidiously and plausibly take credit by crafting a utilitarian narrative, just as you are right now, when in actuality it's nothing more than a side effect of failure and certainly not a mechanism for success. Furthermore, not until modernity have we seen societies actually become largely secular and even atheistic. So I'm not sure what he means by lose religion when talking about deep history. Atheists all throughout history were simply very uncommon people and therefore cannot be scapegoated for the collapse of civilizations the way it seems you're attempting to scapegoat us. If you look at modern nations, all of the most successful countries are the places where the most atheists reside. This illustrates my point in real time that health, wealth, and education tend to lead more people to things like atheism and low birth rates, whereas high mortality, poverty, lack of education, and violence tend to lead more people to religion and high birth rates. This comes down to a factor that we can both agree upon. Religion gives people hope. So, naturally, religion tends to thrive where hope is needed and does not thrive where hope is not needed. In other words, the health of a given society can usually be measured by the percentage of atheists in it. More atheists equals a healthier society, so that's a good sign. Fewer atheists in your society is a bad sign. And I'm not giving credit to atheists for that, the way you mistakenly give credit to the religious. I'm simply saying that atheism tends to be a side effect of prosperity and success, much like religion tends to be a side effect of poverty and failure. The most religious places on earth are Central and South America, which are overwhelmingly Christian and also contain the most violent countries on earth. Africa and the Middle East are extremely religious, while your least religious places are your Western countries, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Northern European countries, and the U.S., which is secular in a lot of ways, but is a bit of an outlier in terms of religion. Estonia is the least religious country on earth, only about 16% religious, and it has a far lower crime rate than the United States, which has higher religiosity. If religion had a significant impact upon a nation's success, then the third world simply should have surpassed all these secular Western nations a long time ago. The fact remains, however, you can blindly pick a nice place to live in the world if you simply know one thing about it. What's the percentage of atheists there?
When an age of decadence is reached in a society, an age of liberalism follows. When you take God out of the equation, man tries to become God.
Man tries to become God when you leave God in the equation too, even if there is one true God and your religion is the correct one. Think of all the other false religions that have existed throughout history. From where did those religions come? They were invented by people, except yours, of course, which is very convenient. So being religious is not going to protect you from people trying to be God, and in fact, they'll have even more of an opportunity to speak on God's behalf in a society of theists than in a society of atheists. You're not safe from people trying to become God by deifying their ideals, by asserting their own opinions and preferences as being the desires of God. That's just standard fare.
Communism, which is once again trying to infiltrate every facet of our culture and compromise our institutions in the form of globalism, believes that the state is God, that it can be mother and father to an infantilized, powerless and impoverished proletariat.
And that's religion's job, right? You talk about globalism, but what is more global than Christianity? You talk about being father to the infantilized, powerless and impoverished. But is that not precisely how religion has placated the masses for thousands of years? A repeated theme in this video, which we both agree, is that religion gives people hope, right? Well, where you see the good in that, I see false hope, thus disempowerment. But what you either fail or refuse to see is how religion also uses that false hope to manipulate people. Maybe you're right about communism. If that's the case, then of course religion would be threatened by the direct competition. And if it is, maybe that should be a red flag to you.
It doesn't even matter if you believe in an afterlife or an interventionist God at all, or how the universe got started. These discussions are great fodder for theoretical debates, but they won't build or maintain a society. They won't protect against communism or indeed another outside religion that seeks to dominate the West. Everything the left has done has been a gradual attempt to take people away from who and what they are and where they came from.
What does that even mean? Take people away from who and what they are. Who are you to say what someone must be? You don't know. You're not inside the minds of others. Is this projection? And of course, the left wants to take people away from where they're from. History is a dark place. Progressivism should be about moving people out of that dark place. If you want to argue that the direction they want to go is also bad, then come up with some better arguments for that.
Christianity celebrates the vital importance of the family unit, the most powerful defense against an authoritarian state.
Citation needed. Families are ubiquitous throughout the world and throughout history. Wherever an authoritarian state has arisen, it has done so amidst a society of families.
In Christianity, the roles of men and women are clearly defined, with great respect given to the unique roles of the mother and the father and the importance of raising children in a set of values shared by other members of our community and tribe.
You just got done talking about an authoritarian state, yet you fail to see how imposing social roles on people based upon their gender is authoritarian. Now that's quite the blind spot you have there. I know gender roles must seem innocuous enough to some of you. that there's no big deal with expecting women to stay at home and raise kids while men go out and work, because for a long time that was normal. But in actuality, this is the stuff of villains and heroes. There's nothing wrong with freely choosing such a role for yourself, but it would take a villain to want to control your destiny based upon the way you were born. And it would take a hero to free you to pursue your dreams. Don't be the villain. Be the hero. Whenever you hear someone saying that certain people should have certain roles in society simply because of how they were born, that should set off all kinds of alarm bells. That is some straight up dystopian thought.
The community building aspect of the religious service, the Mass and the profession of faith ensure that everyone knows they are part of something bigger than themselves.
That's one of the reasons religious indoctrination is so successful. It's easier to get someone to believe a falsehood if they see that many other people believe it. If there's an organized, ritualized, traditional structure built around the falsehood, it lends tremendous credibility to that falsehood.
That there's an authority beyond a democratically elected politician in office. This is how a nation state is maintained, by recognizing the value of the family.
Since when do you need religion to recognize the value of the family? This is yet again someone attempting to use religion to take credit for a good thing that comes naturally to human beings. People going to church does not maintain a nation state, nor cause people to value their families, as if I, as an atheist, don't properly value my wife and my son. According to Pew, 74% of divorced people are Christian, 2% are atheist. Furthermore, having a dogmatic view of the family unit, that they can only look a certain way, is going to marginalize a lot of people. And consider what happens to those who have shitty families. There should be fail-safes for that in society so that people don't have to rely on their families, because not all families are good and healthy. The irony is that the so-called authority of religion that's supposedly beyond the democratically elected politician in office is that it's so often a wonderful tool of manipulation for that same politician so that they can keep getting reelected by pandering to their religious constituents, using religion to gain and maintain their power, and the religious authority you value so much as being above the state actually becomes an unwitting handy-dandy tool of the state itself.
As you can see, it's not hard to understand why the leftist cultural Marxists have attacked religion and the family at every turn. This is what Yuri Bezmenov covered extensively in his lectures. The subversion of America, like many Western nations, has taken place by promoting hedonism, sexuality, drugs, and the obsession with materialism, individual rights, and individualism. Anything that gets people away from Christianity, settling down, starting a family, and raising their children in the value system of their ancestors.
Alright, it's hard to know where to begin with this mess because you've scrambled up several different ideologies here and have everything backwards. You just got done complaining about communism, but materialism, which I don't really perceive as a problem unless it's taken to excess, which is true of anything in excess, was far more extensively perpetuated by capitalism than communism. The promotion of hedonism and sexuality was also inherent in selling people materialism via capitalism. So if you have a problem with the promotion of hedonism, sexuality, and materialism, which I certainly don't, then you have a problem with capitalism, sir. You also mentioned drugs, but again, that's another form of market problem. Drugs are mass-produced in third world countries that have Christian supermajorities, and they're shipped to where there is a high demand, and that high demand is artificially created through illegality, which gives criminals and cartels a drug monopoly, thereby handing them immense power through a black market conducive to kickbacks and revenue for police, and a private prison industry, not to mention another excuse to take more and more freedoms from the citizenry, which is also wholeheartedly approved of, incidentally, by certain corrupt government officials who then direct funds and legislature based upon the wholly unnecessary manufactured drug conflict enabled by the prohibition that similarly affected alcohol-related criminality back when drinking was illegal, thereby giving power to violent gangsters. What eventually defeated the gangsters was not a corrupt and bloated private prison industry, nor a war on alcohol, nor a shady government blatantly stealing from people via civil asset forfeiture. No, what actually defeated them was direct competition in a free market, which entails the very promotion you're complaining about. So, what you're actually doing is complaining about the solution to the problem you're complaining about. Now, as you can see, the problem is a little more complex than people no longer believing that a first century Jewish carpenter came back to life and literally floated up into the goddamn clouds. That's utterly childish. But you know who would want you to keep believing that? Literally both sides of the drug conflict, who don't want their flow of blood-soaked money to end. The bad guys want you to continue to moralize drugs so that it remains illegal so that they can maintain their monopoly. And the so-called good guys want you to continue to moralize drugs so that they can use the conflict to secure more power, direct funds, and curtail freedoms.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
In Christian nations, the origin story of our culture is the birth of Christ. Now, even if you're not religious, even if you don't take the stories of Jesus literally, you can probably acknowledge that an origin story about the birth of a child and a savior born to bring peace to the world is a powerful message and a symbol of hope for future generations. But if people are encouraged to move away from Christianity, then they lose attachment to this story, and the origin story of who and what they are becomes rewritten.
That's not true. You don't have to have an organized belief system to have an attachment to a story from which you derive morals. If the Lord of the Rings encouraged you to persevere, neither your attachment to that story nor the story itself will disappear for failure to become a Lord of the Rings-based religion. The Iliad and the Odyssey are around 1,000 years older than Christianity, and they managed to survive without becoming holy books. They are products of Western civilization, by the way, despite being far older than Christianity, which is a tradition that came from the Near East and was imported into Western civilization.
It's replaced with a focus on the worst moments in our history. This is why in many modern liberalized Western nations nowadays, the native people are being encouraged to be ashamed of their past. In social justice infested college courses in America, young Americans are brainwashed into self-loathing. They're encouraged to feel guilty for atrocities committed by their ancestors from hundreds of years ago. The same is true of many European nations. Their people are being encouraged to feel an intense sense of guilt and self-hatred for their colonial past, for example. So once the story we told ourselves about where we came from spiritually was based on the hope of a young child being born who could usher in a new age of peace for all humanity, now it's about negativity, despair, and hopelessness. You cannot build anything stable or successful on such foundations.
Now that is astoundingly backwards. Dave, you are a Christian talking about how it's the other side encouraging feelings of guilt and self-loathing. You are in desperate need of self-awareness. You know, I am immediately reminded of a video I recently watched of one of your fellow Christian conservatives. Here, have a listen.
The very concept of grace is by nature giving us what we in fact do not deserve. The Bible is clear that all of us deserve punishment. Apart from Christ, we are all condemned. John 3:18 says this, "Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only Son of God." Jeremiah 17:9 says our hearts are desperately wicked. Isaiah 64:6 it says, "We have all become like one who is unclean, and all our righteous deeds are like a polluted garment." Some translations say like a filthy rag. That's what our righteous deeds are. Romans 3:10 through 11 says, "None is righteous, no, not one. No one understands. No one seeks God." Ephesians 2:1 through 3 says this, "And you were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked, following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that is now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of the body and the mind, and were by nature children of wrath like the rest of mankind." So apart from Christ, we are not just bad people, but we are condemned. We are dead in our sin. We are corrupted. We are polluted. We are desperately wicked, whether we feel like we are or not. We are completely lost. We are completely incapable of cleaning ourselves up or making ourselves presentable to God. This means that in order to be saved, we need grace. We have to have it.
Yes, here's the problem. I happen to have the solution for you. Now, talk more about how it's the other side that teaches feelings of guilt and self-loathing. Dave spins this religion that's rooted in guilt as a young child being born who could usher in a new age of peace. Well, let's look at reality, Dave. What actually happened after Christ's life and death. In the thousands of years that followed, this new era of peace has only been approached the less religious we became. Jesus Christ himself was someone who fought against the religious conventions of his time. Dave, you are being a social justice warrior for the Christian majority, condemning those who fight against the religious conventions of our time. I can easily see how if you had been born during Jesus' time, how someone like you, a religious conservative, looking to preserve the religious conventions of his time, would be appalled at hearing the things Jesus had to say. The way he seemed to amend the text you held sacred. And we all know how you're against amending things. The religious conservatives of his time found him so contentious that they killed him. Can you honestly say that you would not have been among his detractors, promoting a maintaining of normalcy, a return to the old ways, rather than following this radical new preacher who literally encouraged men to leave their families behind?
On the theme of the birth of a child, third-wave feminism has promoted and attempted to normalize abortion, so the left has literally become like a death cult.
Okay, there are no rules in the Bible against abortion, and in fact abortion is prescribed in the Bible for women who are accused of adultery by their husbands. Furthermore, the God character himself commits and commands abortions and literal infanticide several times in the Bible. This inconsistency between what the Bible says from what the believers say lead me to believe that the abortion issue really is more about control than morality, at least for the religious. I have a much easier time believing that an atheist who is against abortion is far more sincere than a religious person who is against it.
You see, although the promotion of left-wing ideology is ultimately about power, it's also not quite as simple as a straightforward attack on conservatism. It's an attack on Christianity that goes back as far as the crucifixion of Christ, getting people away from their Christian heritage and values, disconnecting people from God, and making them docile and compliant by promoting distractions that placate the masses: consumerism, pornography, sex, instant gratification, drugs, and materialism.
Again, this is utterly bizarre. He equates leftism with communism, But it's capitalism that placates the masses with consumerism, porn, sex, instant gratification, drugs, and materialism. So if those things are an attack on Christianity, then it's certainly not an attack by the left. Regardless, it's ridiculous to construe those things as an attack on Christianity. Nobody is forcing Christians to consume porn or buy stuff. Be accountable. Jesus. You'd have to be incredibly weak to believe that failing to exercise basic restraint or personal responsibility is the same as being attacked. That's absurd. Imagine thinking that's an attack. Your wife catches you watching porn, so you're all like, honey, it's the left trying to attack my Christian faith, I swear.
Now, my mother, who was devoutly Christian, died 22 months ago from today. Since her passing, it's as though something has resonated within me that hadn't before. As though when she left, the doorway to some other place was left just slightly ajar, wide enough for some kind of light to come through.
Dave, I'm sorry to hear about your mother. I know how rough it can be to lose a parent. I had to go through that whole process with my father 12 years ago, and I still think about him every day. Normally, I would not get personal in discussions like this, but you brought this up, so I just have to say, notice how even in your own life, tragedy begat religion. Not atheism, not secularism. Tragedy. The desire for hope, even if it's false hope. The very same reason religiosity fluctuates with a nation's success, not because of atheism and not because of secularism. That said, you're not alone. Your story is very formulaic. You hit all the stereotypes, from atheist teenager, gradually becoming more conservative, and then turning to God after a traumatic event. Regardless, I sort of suspect that you still don't actually believe in the God of the Bible. I think you dig its aesthetic, and I think you've been duped to perceive it as a sort of ideological opposite of that which you despise. And that what you're doing right now essentially boils down to identity politics. You're on the right, so you think you should be Christian, and they're on the left, so you think they hate it.
I knelt down one night, and for the first time in many years, prayed the Lord's Prayer. I'd said the Our Father many times as a child. I repeated it like a mantra, words that never truly meant anything to me. But this time, suddenly something changed when I reached the line, "Lead us not into temptation." Now, you can look at those words and not fully interpret their reason for being. Lead us not into temptation. What's so objectively bad about temptation? Well, it's the next line that suddenly struck a chord with me because it justifies that previous line. But deliver us from evil. So, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Now, all of a sudden, for the first time, given everything I was witnessing in the world, I could understand the context of why this prayer had been written this particular way. What has the left been promoting for the past number of decades? Temptation, sin, greed, materialism, deviation from the path, a denial of nature.
Here we go again with this bizarre shifting of capitalism onto the left. Of course, it's totally possible to be left-leaning and capitalist, but you are arguing from a position that the left is communistic and the right is capitalistic. Now, all these things you're complaining about, however, are just basic capitalistic tendencies. It appears that you don't like the results of capitalism just as much as the communists. Perhaps you'd be happier as a communist. Believe it or not, Dave, there are socialist and communist Christians.
If you corrupt the people, promote vice and their baser animal instincts, you bring about the destruction of the nation-state. Promiscuity rather than monogamy results in unplanned pregnancy, broken homes, low parental investment. Marriage is destroyed by feminism. Alternative lifestyles are promoted. The act of sexual union between two people is no longer respected. Pregnancy and the creation of new life becomes a nuisance.
It's like this guy was compiled by memes. Look, You really are quite the nosy busybody for somebody who supposedly does not like authoritarianism. You say if you corrupt the people, promote vice, etc., but that's the basis of your religion. The people are inherently corrupt according to Christianity, and the whole point of the religion is that there's nothing any one of us can do to fix it. It's especially foolish for you to try to sell your religion as the solution to these problems when your religion doesn't even try to sell itself as a solution to these problems, nor does it claim that these problems can ever be solved except by God himself. Now you talk about promiscuity and unplanned pregnancy, but if you want to find where those numbers are highest in my country of the United States, for instance, you have to go to the most religious states. You talk about the left denying nature, but where abstinence only rather than sexual education is taught, we see teen pregnancy skyrocket. Not only is the religious right filled with evolution deniers, but it's filled with human nature deniers. You say that pregnancy and the creation of new life becomes a nuisance, but most abortions are given to Catholics and Protestants. Again and again, we see that your assertions have no factual basis. Facts don't care about your feelings, Dave.
By no longer believing in a power beyond man, the state becomes the thing that everyone relies on, from welfare to their rights. It becomes extremely powerful and soon after, authoritarian.
Okay, that has nothing to do with God belief. We don't just rely on the state, we rely on society. Because we've become a highly specialized species through our cooperation. We've discovered that people can have easier lives with a division of labor, including automation. A consequence of that is our dependence upon one another. Pluck your average first world person out of their modern society, whether they believe in God or not, and drop them into the middle of a deep wilderness. And then take someone from 20,000 years ago and do the same. Which one of them is more likely to survive? We changed as a species. Our societies are structured around shaping the earth to service us, rather than the hunter-gatherer way of coping with nature to survive. You are reliant on the system, Dave, regardless of your theism. 7.5 billion people are able to live on this planet because we set up an intricate system of infrastructure, constantly maintained, uncontrolled by any one person, coordinated around the world, and if a catastrophe compromises that system, millions of people will die. That system was not the result of some ridiculous atheist conspiracy to keep people dependent on the state. It was the result of human nature, the result of constantly looking for ways to make life easier, which requires organization. Human beings who do not organize are at the mercy of those who do. And it's that organization that inevitably leads to the state.
Suddenly, in those few words of the Our Father, I had gained an insight and a truth that had been hiding in plain sight my whole life.
What? A new way to demonize the left by blaming them for the capitalist materialism that you don't like so much?
As E. Michael Jones would call it, logos. St. Augustine said that a man has as many masters as he has vices. And as E. Michael Jones has talked about, the left has sold vice as a form of liberation.
You don't like freedom. What you want is worse than being their master. You want to be their template. You want people to be more like you, hegemonic. I want to live in a society where people are free to do what they want as long as they're not hurting others or being an imposition. If some people want to have sex or do drugs or watch their favorite shows, play video games, get a sex change operation or whatever, then I think they should be able to do so. It's none of my business. Leave people alone. I even extend to you that same respect and think you should be able to to freely practice your religion. But when you start becoming an imposition, trying to demonize people, trying to promote the biased, underhanded narratives in the same way you accuse others, then you're naturally going to get some criticisms from me. See, you are authoritarian in this scenario, appealing to the ultimate authority from on high, and it's really just from other people, in order to control other people, so that the rest of the society looks more like you. See, I'm the opposite. I favor freedom, and I favor a society that is not all like me, because if it were, I just think it would be a boring place to live.
In truth, we become enslaved to our base, greedy and primitive natures, and thus much easier for governments to control. The people become docile and malleable and atomized, especially since identity politics is promoted to further divide and conquer people.
Look, Dave, what the hell do you think you've been doing through this whole video and throughout your whole channel? You are identity politics personified, my man. You constantly pit one side against the other. My side good, their side bad. Everything that's good and right is us. Everything that's bad and wrong is them. You are a classic propagandist. And this idea that we've become enslaved to our primitive natures to be easier for governments to control has historically been a religious tactic. It has been religion that has taken advantage of our primitive nature to convince us into thinking that our natural state of liking things like food and sex and material possessions and other such sins are bad and wrong, thus we need saving. We have a disease and thus need the cure, i.e. the authority of the religion, which is in turn used by the state. Most nation states have used religion. Certainly not condemned it. Sure, there were a few societies that attempted to ban religion. China, Russia, France. And I don't agree with what they did. Almost every other nation state, however, found religion to be a useful tool of manipulation. And with those few exceptions I mentioned, religion has actually made people more vulnerable to the state.
Also becoming increasingly less safe under leftist control and further destabilized and therefore more heavily policed.
That's just flat out not true. Crime has steadily declined since the early 90s, and like I've had to say time and time again, the most violent places on earth are currently also the most Christian, those being Central and South America, and the next most violent places on earth being in Africa, which is a mixture of Christian and Islamic, and the Middle East, which is majority Islamic. All the most violent places are highly religious, and all the most peaceful places have the highest atheist populations.
The power of the state is increasing as people surrender their freedom for more so-called security.
Okay, and the last time that actually happened on a massive scale was with the Patriot Act, which happened under a president who claimed to be acting on God's behalf, motivated by his religion in a conflict with another religion. Both Abrahamic, by the way. Bear in mind, by the way, that you're offering no real solution here. You simply want to usurp the authority of one group and supplant it with the authority of another, failing to realize that both groups, religion and government, have already mingled enough for your so-called solution to be indistinguishable from the very worst aspects of today's politics. What religion actually does is give the state another tool of control.
Now these words of this prayer began to make sense. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. If an organ in the body or a cell is damaged, if part of us is dying, the rest of the body suffers.
Now, to some people, saying these things might seem innocuous enough, but this is actually some serious, hardcore, and frankly, potentially dangerous vilification, likening us to a damaged part of the body that's going to make the rest of the body suffer. It gives people permission to treat us like garbage, to turn us into second-class citizens, and historically, rhetoric like this has even led to genocide.
If a large portion of individuals in our society are succumbing to a self-destructive path, the society suffers as a whole. Ironically, people are being sold enslavement as freedom.
Look, the Christian nationalist is actually talking about the irony of being sold enslavement as freedom. You know, the guy selling the religion based around the God who demands your worship for all of eternity, and if you refused, then you are punished forever. You know, freedom.
The left hates Christianity more than anything because it can't control people.
Dave, stop conflating politics with religion. You're stuck in a filter bubble. Get out of the house. Talk to real-life flesh and blood people. Plenty of people on the left are Christians.
Enslavement as freedom. The left hates Christianity more than anything because it can't control people who believe in something bigger than the state.
Again, this is a highly flawed analysis. One way the state can and does control people is through the strategic use of religion. What's interesting to note is that even politicians on the left openly, publicly endorse Christianity. They regularly say things like, God bless America. They publicly pray. They too pander to Christians. Yet you say the left hates Christianity more than anything. But I think it's you who hates the left more than anything. And you're simply projecting this hatred.
It's now my belief that the greatest act of defiance we can make against globalism is to spread the teachings of Jesus Christ.
Yes, the best way to fight globalism is to get everyone on the globe to think and believe the same thing. That ought to do it. Some people don't realize this, so I try to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, but for many, the term globalism is code for the Jews. Now, Dave, I wonder if you know this, because if you liken globalism not to some nebulous Jewish conspiracy, but to worldwide homogeneity, then your solution to combat homogeneity with homogeneity doesn't make any sense. Furthermore, your solution has been tried and tested. The vast majority of countries that have a high Christian percentage are what Donald Trump would refer to as shitholes. Christianity does not fix the problems you're asking it to. That point is no longer up for debate. It's over. The stats are in. The facts are against you. It's gotten to the point where Christians are desperately building walls to keep other Christians out, which is one reason I strongly suspect that if everyone on earth were finally, suddenly Christians, you still wouldn't be happy about it.
On the Sermon of the Mount, Christ says, "Resist not evil." Now I thought I understood this message, that this commandment made no sense. Of course we have to resist evil, otherwise it'll win. Now recently I heard a pretty interesting interpretation of this commandment by John Butler, which was something to the effect of, don't justify evil by giving it your attention. Don't come into conflict with it, because to do so is to give it power. There is only one power in the universe, one force, not two forces. Evil is only maintained so long as people stray from the path. You empower it by giving it your attention. Think of it another way. If you're driving to a destination and you have two possible roads before you, once you know that you're on the correct road, you don't need to give any attention to the wrong road anymore. You don't need to focus on the darkness when you're looking towards the light. As Bezmenov explained, the antidote to Marxist subversion is to ignore its tactics and focus on religion instead.
Dave, you're approaching around 2,000 videos on your channel, and the vast majority of those videos focuses on what you consider to be evil and darkness. All you do is complain about the left, highlight what you're outraged about that day, get hyper offended, rant and rave, weep about how the sky is falling and how the social justice warriors are going to bring about Armageddon because the new Ghostbusters movie or Ocean's movie has a cast of women protagonists, or because a character that was once played by a white actor is being played by a black actor. Now, I completely understand if you want to focus on and complain about the things that bother you. I certainly do so. But for you to tell people not to focus on what you believe to be the wrong path, to not justify your opposition by giving them your attention, when that's exactly what you do with your every single upload, is off the charts hypocrisy. Even this exact video in which you say that violates the very principles you espouse within it. Can you really lack that much self-awareness? It's remarkable. Time for some serious introspection, my man.
The most difficult and at the same time the simplest answer to the subversion is to start it here and even before, by bringing back the society to religion, something that you cannot touch and eat and put on yourself, but something that rules society and makes it move and preserve it. A Soviet scientist, Shafarevich, who has nothing to do with religion, did a very intensive research on the history of socialist countries, and he discovered, actually he didn't discover it, he just brought to attention of his readers, that civilizations like Mohenjo-Daro, like Egypt, like Maya, Incas, like Babylonian culture, collapsed and disappeared from the surface of Earth the moment they lost religion. As simple as that. They disintegrated.
Yeah, that certainly is simple. Those societies were not atheistic. They didn't lose religion. What's interesting to note is that now we've moved on from selling Christianity to selling religion in general, because those societies weren't Christian either. Religion owns the vast majority of history. Religion was present throughout every great civilizational collapse throughout Earth's history. This argument that throughout history religion was lost and then a collapse occurred is simply not true. Historically, atheism has been an extremely rare phenomenon. Modernity is very unique because religion has declined more now than it ever has before. And what we're seeing now is a very frightened and defensive reaction by the religious, who are crying out that we still need them. It's afraid to die, so it's trying to sell itself now by telling us all this bad stuff that's going to happen without it. Only reality exists. We can see how the world has improved despite religion's great decline. And in fact, how religion's great decline is because the world has improved so much. The fact that some consensual adults do things with their private parts that you don't like doesn't mean that we're on the verge of a societal collapse. Now, there are many foolish things going on right now that could lead us to an actual collapse, but lack of religion is not one of them. So if I were you, I'd shift your focus to an actual existential threat.
They disintegrated. All the sophisticated technology and computers will not prevent society from disintegrating and eventually dying out. Have you ever met a person who would sacrifice his life, freedom, for the truth like that? This is truth. I never met a person who said, this is truth and I'm ready to shoot me. To defend the truth. Right? But millions sacrifice their life, freedom, comfort, everything for things like God.
Yeah, we just had 9/11. This can really be an argument against you, Dave. I don't know why you put it in your video. As I've said before, governments use religion to manipulate people, and if religion can get people to sacrifice their lives, freedom, comfort, and everything, it can be a very useful tool indeed for said governments. One way this is done is by pitting Christianity and Islam against each other, religions which both believe in the existence of Yahweh as the one true God. They were actually allied for a while during the mid-20th century in their efforts to combat communism. But as we know, the West's support of the Islamic theocracies came back to bite us, didn't it? This was all about using religion to affect geopolitics. A lot of the problems you complain about today, like the migrant crisis, Islamist terrorism, etc., are examples of the effects of governments on both sides that used religion to manipulate people. This solution that you're proposing is not new, and in fact is the very cause of many of the problems that you actually complain about.
Like Jesus Christ. It's an honor.
In Ireland, many people conflate the corrupted institution of the Catholic Church with Christianity.
Wait a minute. So you acknowledge that religious institutions particularly dedicated to Christianity can be corrupted. So what makes you think that Christianity is some wonderful solution that is immune from the corrupting effects you're so worried about?
And because people have rejected their spiritual tradition, what has happened in Ireland?
Well, they stopped killing each other in terrorist attacks, for one.
Well, it's becoming less Irish by the day. Try to think of a Western nation that's succumbed to leftism that's also got strong borders. When Ireland began to lose its faith, which is to say the pillar it was built on, unsurprisingly, it began to slowly unravel.
No, bullshit. See, here we go. Ireland is 83.8% Christian. If you're not happy with that, there's several countries where the Christian population is much higher. Venezuela, Honduras, Uganda, Brazil, the Congo, Colombia, Mexico, Rwanda, Ecuador, Haiti. How much do you want to bet that if Ireland suddenly started importing a bunch of people from those Christian supermajority countries, Dave would still care very much, even though they'd all be Christian immigrants? Now, I suspect this because Christian Americans still care very much about migrants coming into the U.S. from Mexico, Central and South America, even though those migrants are also Christians. The fact that they're Christian migrants doesn't matter to Christian Americans. The Christian Americans still don't want them here. So maybe religion is a convenient excuse for you. Ask yourself, what would happen to your religious excuse if Ireland imported most of its immigrants from Uganda or Rwanda? You can't use religion as an excuse then, so what would you use? Kind of makes your video pointless. Since you'd have Christianity in common, do you think you might be okay with all the immigrants being Ugandan? Or would there be something else about them you'd have a problem with? Think about it. And then honestly ask yourself if it's truly religion that concerns you, Dave.
Now marriage has been redefined, and people have been so brainwashed that they've literally voted to take away the rights from a portion of their own society, the unborn.
This marriage has been redefined argument is bad. If a man refers to another man as his husband, you understand perfectly well what their relationship is. Nothing has been redefined. It's just that you don't like it and you find it icky. Well, too bad. Mind your own business. Marry a woman if that's what you want to do, but live your own life. Gay people are around 3% of the population, and the facts don't show them to be of any particular burden on a society. What's actually more of a demonstrable burden on society is your attempt to vilify them. You are part of a supermajority attempting to sow discord and conflict against a tiny minority, and you're doing it because you laughably think that you're the one who is being transgressed upon.
And they celebrated this with tears of joy in the streets when they did so. They've given up on their future because the most vulnerable and precious in our society, our children, are no longer protected.
You paint this as people celebrating in the streets because they finally get to kill children. The most infuriating thing about the abortion debate is how both sides talk past each other. One side really does think that an abortion is killing a baby, and the other side really does not think that it's about killing a baby. That's where the argument should be. But all too often it devolves into accusations rather than substantive arguments, as you can see here.
And their right to life has been superseded by a woman's right to treat that life as if it was nothing more than a piercing or a tattoo on her body.
This is preaching to the choir type rhetoric. You're not going to convince anyone with this, because if you wanted to do that, you'd be arguing about the nature of the fetus rather than a woman's right to kill babies, which a woman who gets an abortion almost certainly does not believe. Like I said before, though, most people who get abortions are Christians, which is perfectly consistent with the Bible because, like I said, the Bible not only does not forbid abortions, but in some places demands them for things like infidelity. Does a fetus conceived by a woman cheating on her husband not have the right to life? Is such infidelity the fault of that unborn child? You see, again and again, you're asking your religion to do something that not only it doesn't do in reality, but that it simply does not truly endorse in its scripture. When you ask people for actual Bible verses against abortion, the verses they usually give are never actually about abortion. It's always very roundabout, unrelated verses about how humans are different from animals, or about how children are a blessing, or how killing the innocent is bad. But if I want to show how the Bible supports abortion, I can point to verses that specifically refer to abortion and God's condoning or committing of it.
If you change the values of a nation's people, you change the nation. If you distract the people with concerns about rights this and rights that, hedonism, sexuality, etc., they will become focused on selfish navel-gazing and concerns that don't matter.
These concerns don't matter to you because you do not have to struggle to be accepted. Dave, people like us are accepted by default. With the exception of a few places and social circles, I never have to worry about being a straight white male. I want that same situation for other people who are not like me. I want them to experience a life in which they don't have to worry about their race or gender or sexual orientation, just as I don't have to worry about it. And for you, the side benefit of that will be that when people no longer have to worry about things like their race or gender, then they'll stop complaining about it, and identity politics will finally end, if you let it end. Unfortunately, it's people like you who make life very difficult for people like them. So if you don't want them to be focused on themselves, their identity and their rights, then maybe you should practice what you preached earlier, and you yourself should stop focusing on them. If you simply left people alone and let them live their lives, you would not have to hear them complain about you.
Contrast liberal Ireland to conservative Poland. In Poland, they have Christian values and a strong sense of their identity and a desire to maintain strong borders. Poland will therefore survive.
They also had those same things during World War II. Before the Holocaust, when many of the Jews were being deported from Germany, they trekked to Poland as refugees, and Poland refused them for some time, forcing them to sleep outside on the border. In the end, though, Poland's Christian values and their strong sense of identity and a desire to maintain strong borders could not save them from another nation with Christian values and a strong sense of identity and a desire to maintain strong borders, which was Nazi Germany, 90% Christian, and they rose to power with rhetoric against degeneracy and hedonism. which of course boils down to anyone who is not like them, or who has been maligned as a subversive. Any of this sounding familiar, Dave?
I look at the vandalization of our Christian heritage and celebrations. St. Patrick's Day is reduced to a glorified excuse for massive alcohol consumption. Easter doesn't appear to be about the death of Christ for most people anymore. It's become about chocolate eggs and the Easter bunny. Likewise, Christmas is completely divorced from the birth of Christ, and it's now become a tacky commercial holiday that begins in late September and promotes hyper-consumerism and materialism.
You keep complaining about the effects of capitalism, but I love it. I absolutely revel in what capitalism has done to the holidays. I like Christmas being about giving my kid presents, and Easter about giving him candy. There's this huge glaring inconsistency in the way you conflate religion and politics by associating religion with the right and irreligion with the left when it's convenient, but then bizarrely associate capitalism and individualism with the left and collectivism and community with the right. Communism is against capitalism, and even the word communism itself is derived from the same root as community. Your perceptions are just oddly backwards.
People now engage in alternative quasi-spiritual practices, trying to replace real spirituality with yoga and meditation.
Spoiler alert, there's no such thing as real spirituality. It's all just different ways of fooling yourself. Dave, you just value a particular brand of fooling yourself. Now, you find that it has more merit because you've fallen for the fallacy of tradition, that something is more true or valid or valuable simply because it has been around longer. You know it has been tried and tested, but you either don't know or don't acknowledge that it has been tried and tested and always came up wanting. At best, it never solved the problems you think it does, and at worst, it downright caused the problems you're asking it to solve. I don't want to completely write off all forms of spirituality because some people don't mean anything supernatural by that word, because they simply mean it as a sense of wonder and belonging. And I think that's fine, though it can be confusing when you use the word spiritual to describe it.
Something more is needed. With the loss of religion, we've also jettisoned notions of sacrifice, personal accountability, restraint, honor, and duty. These were considered virtues once.
What a horrendous slandering of non-religious people. I'm an atheist, a father, a husband, a veteran, a homeowner. I have no criminal record, and I know many others like me. Furthermore, I've known many irresponsible people who were very religious. Because religion and hypocrisy are so tightly woven, you simply cannot rely upon religion to successfully promote even the very tenets it espouses. Not only are all the first world nations the most secular, but the prisons have disproportionately fewer atheists than the overall population. Again, I'm not saying that this is because of atheism. Unlike you, I don't promote my beliefs about a deity as the solution for all the world's problems. Because atheism correlates to prosperity, health, and education, you will naturally see fewer atheists in prison. So, why do I bring it up? Because these facts soundly refute your claim that a lack of religion causes people to lack accountability, restraint, honor, and duty. The thing is, your religion itself doesn't even claim to cure people of these things, and in fact, it says the very opposite, that people are hopelessly corrupt, no matter their good works, no matter how pious they try to be, and that only God himself can do anything for them.
Now there's another important component of this, the recognition that we are corruptible and imperfect, that we will try and often fail to be good.
Amazing. See, that's the point that I just used to refute you. I'm able to do so because you're being inconsistent right now.
This is why no matter how much we mess up, no matter what we've said or done or not done, The challenge of redemption is always possible. The gift of forgiveness is always offered by God.
Which is exactly why it's Christianity and not atheism that is more conducive to a lack of accountability. All too often, rather than making amends with the people they've wronged, rather than paying restitution to the real-life flesh and blood people they've affected, a Christian can quietly talk to God in private and make themselves feel better, believing that God sees them and forgives them, when in actuality, they're all alone, talking to themselves, convincing themselves that they are redeemed. And then they go out and do it again, knowing full well that not only can they repeat the process, but according to Scripture, they are hopelessly doomed to repeat the process. So they can simply justify it as their flawed human nature. This is the epitome of lacking accountability, duty, and honor.
Now, I'm not going to pontificate to you or sell you some notion of an anthropomorphic, all-powerful being in the sky. I have no idea what that force resembles. I'm also not going to tell you that the purpose of doing good is a reward in heaven. I'm not even fully sold on the idea of an afterlife.
It's sounding more and more like you're a cultural Christian and that you don't actually believe in the claims of Christianity, which is what I thought.
Maybe there is something, I don't know, but that's not why I changed. To do good knowing there's no reward is to be truly noble. When I prayed to God, I said, I will change even if I get no answer, because the word of Jesus makes more sense to me now given the state of our world. So at some point, I stopped believing in nothing.
And just like that, it's back to sounding like you were never an atheist. So now I'm kind of torn. How many of you atheists out there claim to believe in nothing? Does that sound like an accurate representation? I don't think so. You know what I think about nothing? I think nothing is as non-existent as the Christian God. Nothingness is a concept that was invented by human beings. Just like God, the concept of nothingness has never been demonstrated, nor could it be, because you yourself would have to cease existing for there to be nothingness, and therefore could never actually observe nothingness. I believe there has always been and always will be something, and I think you'll find that most atheists agree with that. Unfortunately, the religious have gotten a lot of mileage out of their straw man dichotomy of the answer being either God or nothing, both of which are concepts invented by human beings. I accept neither.
Because there is simply too much order in the universe, too many telltale signs of purpose and intent in reality for me to ignore the possibility that some guiding hand was behind all of this.
Now remember when you said you weren't going to sell us some notion of an anthropomorphic God? Well, what do you think you're doing right now? This is the classic pareidolia of God. Human beings fine-tune things using precise language to create things like engines and computers. So when we see the universe and it looks very complicated and precise to us, we project the things we are onto it, like seeing a face in a cloud. We anthropomorphize. Complexity comes from us, and we are a part of nature. So when we look back at nature, we see the complexity that we conflate with ourselves and interpret it as intent, as we are intentional beings. It's basically projection. We imprint our descriptive language upon the very things we're attempting to describe. In this case, the universe. This can lead us to see intent where, in fact, there is none. In actuality, an all-powerful God would not need to fine-tune anything. The reason we have to fine-tune things is because we're being restricted by outside rules with which we must contend. So to say that God had to fine-tune the universe is to say that God was being restricted by outside rules with which he had to contend. The more he had to fine-tune it, the less powerful he is. When you say that it's impossible for you to ignore the possibility that there's a God, that's also what most atheists do. We do not ignore the possibility. We explore it, often in much greater depth than theists, who often uncritically accept the answer with which they are raised, who limit themselves to a particular brand of God, or the one they associate with. The predominant God of their culture just so happens to become the one true God. I mean, that's exactly the sort of thing you're promoting here. Atheists don't do that. We're willing to entertain the possibility of any gods and argue the merits based on the claims being made and the evidence being presented.
The universe began with the first subatomic particles and then eventually the formation of atoms.
Let me just stop you right there. You don't know that. The Big Bang began with subatomic particles, sure, but you don't know if they were the first, nor if the Big Bang was the beginning of the universe. It's simply the horizon beyond which we cannot see. Scientists refer to our space-time continuum as the known universe, but they just say universe as shorthand, and laymen like yourself run with it as if they really mean that the Big Bang is known to be the beginning of everything. We once thought that the Earth was the universe. We once thought that the solar system was the entire universe. As late as the mid-1920s, less than 100 years ago, we thought that the Milky Way was the entire universe. Now we understand that the Milky Way is utterly microscopic compared to the known universe, that there are hundreds of billions of galaxies at least. Is it right to assume that we now know, like never before, what the entire universe truly entails this time? When has the universe ever given us just one of anything? Yet now we say that there's nothing but the expansion from the Big Bang simply because we can't see it. When have such assumptions ever fared well for us? There will eventually be a time when the galaxies are too far apart to observe each other, and then what will intelligent beings believe about the nature of the known universe? Just try to imagine how much we don't know right now. Now, while some people will use that ignorance as an argument for God, bear in mind that we are not ignorant about the God of the Bible, about whom much has been written, which is why we can argue against such ideas. Before you assume that there's nothing beyond the horizon, understand that you yourself are beyond someone else's horizon.
Then light elements. Before too long, dense concentrations of gases and molecular clouds formed the first stars. Planets formed millions of years later. Some of those planets have atmospheres. Some of them fall into a kind of Goldilocks zone that can support life. From the beginning, the universe is just busy doing stuff, making stuff, and creating ever-increasing complexity. Simple life begins to form and begins to reproduce itself. Some of that life evolves to such a complex degree that suddenly birds are flying around making nests, beavers are constructing dams, and human beings are writing books, building civilizations and empires, and making movies and smartphones. If there's a single instruction that the divine software architect programmed into the universe from the beginning, it's creation.
Which is all very unlike the God of the Bible, an infinitely powerful being who does not need nor gains any benefit from creating a clockwork universe. The vast majority of the known universe, and when I say vast majority, I mean 99.9999999 and on %, is viciously hostile to life, which is infinitely worse than saying a sledgehammer is perfectly designed for eye surgery. Of course, they say that if the universal constants were slightly different, life could not form at all, but we don't know if it's even coherent to say that they could be any different. We can't make any claims about odds because we're currently working with a sample set of 1.
Destruction is part of the cycle of creation and the unending move towards more complexity. Animals and humans die and their bodies will decay into the earth, but other life will feed on those remains. Planets will die, solar systems will be destroyed by exploding stars, but new material will continuously be created in stellar nurseries and recycled by the cosmos. We are the universe made flesh, made aware of itself, and what we believe and how we choose to live matters. Nations will fall, but powerful ideas will remain timeless and powerful forever.
That's not true. I don't want to take credit for this idea. I think it was Ricky Gervais who said something to this effect. But if you wipe out all the scientists, teachers, mathematicians, and the textbooks, given enough time, people will eventually relearn those facts and arrive at the same answers that once existed in those books that were destroyed. But if you did the same with religions, erased all record of them, given enough time, people will never get those same religions back the way they would a scientific fact. Those ideas do not remain powerful and timeless forever, thankfully, and the history of dead religions proves it. He goes on for a while about how we're evil and he's good and we're destructive and he's creative, typical propaganda.
The answer is not only about rejecting destructive ideology. It's about embracing the philosophy of creation. It's about choosing life and not death, hope and not despair. Now, I know a lot of you have your fears for the world. You watch political content because you care. You care about the future and where we're headed. I also know that though we can all agree on a great many things together,
A lot of people watch political content because they like shit show. It's red meat fodder, outrage material, clickbait. I mean,
there's a good chance I won't be able to convince many of you of what I've been saying in this video. So I can only conclude by saying that I believe that the wisdom and lessons of our past will show us how to chart a course to a better future. That it is our duty to help those less fortunate, lest we forget the lesson, there but for the grace of God go I. I believe that we must also pray for our enemies, as they simply know not what they do, and we will all ultimately answer to the same authority in the end.
They simply know not what they do. I mean, you've painted this picture of this intricately woven conspiracy of high intent. The picture you've painted is not one of ignorance, is not one of people not knowing what they're doing, but people knowing exactly what they're doing and doing it with specific intent.
To the same authority in the end. Our enemies may hope for our destruction, but we do not pray for theirs. To do so would make us no different to them. So we pray that they can be saved from the evil they have succumbed to. I believe that those we've lost have never truly left us, that they have become part of something greater and more powerful than any man-made evil in our world. I believe this power is a benevolent and uniting force that governs all things in our universe.
Are you talking about Star Wars?